March 24, 1945. The sky above Berlin hung heavy with ash and iron, the air thick with the droning hum of Allied bombers carving their way through the Reich's crumbling defenses. At 22,000 feet, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, veteran of 73 confirmed kills, holder of the Knight's Cross, locked his eyes on a formation of American P-51 Mustangs escorting a stream of B-17 flying fortresses. His wingman's voice crackled through the radio, Mustangs at 2 o'clock. Red tails. Stigler had heard the rumors in the officers' mess halls of Tempelhof and Rechlin, whispered stories about American pilots of African descent, men the Reich's propaganda machine dismissed as racially inferior, intellectually incapable of mastering the complexities of aerial combat. He had laughed at those stories. They all had. Now, as he rolled his Focke-Wulf FW-190 into an attack vector, he was about to learn the cost of that laughter. The German Luftwaffe of 1945 was not the invincible force that had swept across Poland, France, and the Low Countries 6 years earlier. By the spring of that year, fuel shortages grounded entire squadrons, experienced pilots were scarce, and the eastern and western fronts had devoured Germany's best. Yet the arrogance remained, a stubborn ideology forged in the pseudoscience of racial hierarchy that had poisoned the Third Reich since its inception. To the men who flew for Hitler, the very concept of black pilots was absurd, a contradiction of their carefully constructed worldview. The Luftwaffe's training academies had drilled into their cadets the myth of Aryan supremacy, the belief that mastery of modern warfare belonged exclusively to those of pure Germanic stock. The notion that men descended from slaves, men whom Nazi ideology classified as Untermenschen, subhuman, could outmaneuver, outthink, and outfight the Reich's finest seemed not just unlikely, but biologically impossible. But ideology does not dictate the laws of physics. It does not add horsepower to an engine or sharpen the reflexes of a pilot pulling 8 gs in a vertical climb. And on that cold March morning, as Stigler dove toward the American formation, he discovered that the sky cares nothing for the color of a man's skin. The 332nd Fighter Group, better known as the Tuskegee Airmen, their aircraft marked by distinctive red-painted tails, had arrived in the European theater in February 1944. They were the first African-American military aviators in United States Armed Forces history, products of a segregated training program in Tuskegee, Alabama, where black cadets learned to fly in a nation that still denied them the right to drink from the same water fountains as their white counterparts. They had been trained to excellence not despite the obstacles placed before them, but in defiant response to them. Every flight hour logged, every gunnery pass perfected, every formation drill executed with precision was an act of resistance against a system that insisted they were incapable. By the time they reached the skies over Europe, they had become something their instructors, many of whom doubted they would ever succeed, had not anticipated, the finest escort pilots in the 15th Air Force. The German pilots expected chaos when they engaged the Red Tails. They expected panic, broken formations, rookie mistakes that would turn the bombers they protected into sitting ducks for cannon fire. Instead, they found discipline. When Stigler's FW-190 screamed toward the formation, 4 Mustangs peeled off in perfect coordination, 2 diving to meet his attack head-on while 2 climbed to cover the bomber stream. There was no hesitation, no confusion. The lead pilot, later identified as Captain Roscoe Brown, a native of Washington, D.C., with a degree in physical education from Springfield College, rolled inverted and pulled through in a split-S maneuver that forced Stigler to break off or risk collision. The engagement lasted 11 seconds. In that span, Brown's wingman, Lieutenant Marcellus G. Smith, fired a 3-second burst that punched holes through Stigler's left aileron. The German pilot barely made it back to his airfield, his aircraft trailing smoke, his confidence shattered. The historical record of the 332nd Fighter Group is extraordinary not for its propaganda value, though it became that in post-war America, but for its statistical precision. Between February 1944 and the end of the war in May 1945, the Red Tails flew 15,533 sorties and 1,578 missions. They destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in the air and another 150 on the ground. They damaged or destroyed nearly 1,000 units of ground transportation, trains, trucks, and armored vehicles, crippling the Reich's crumbling supply lines. But the statistic that mattered most to the bomber crews they escorted was this: of the bombers under Red Tail protection, only 27 were lost to enemy fighters. No other escort group in the 15th Air Force could claim a comparable record. The white bomber crews, many of whom harbored the same prejudices as their German adversaries, requested the Red Tails by name. The men they had been taught to despise became the men they trusted with their lives. The Germans had expected inferiority and encountered excellence. They had prepared for weakness and met precision. Luftwaffe after-action reports from early 1945, now archived in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, record a shift in tone when describing engagements with the 332nd. Gone was the dismissive language of racial superiority. In its place appeared clinical respect, the grudging acknowledgement of an opponent who refused to yield air superiority. One report, dated April 7, 1945, notes, enemy escort fighters demonstrated superior coordination and aggression. Attacks against bomber formations proved untenable. The report does not mention the color of the pilot's skin. By then, it no longer mattered. The transformation was not limited to the Germans. Within the American military establishment, still deeply segregated, still governed by men who believed integration would destroy unit cohesion, the success of the Tuskegee Airmen became impossible to ignore. General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., commander of the 332nd and himself a graduate of West Point who had endured 4 years of silence from white cadets who refused to speak to him, compiled meticulous records of every mission, every kill, every bomber safely returned. He understood that excellence alone would not dismantle racism, but that mediocrity would confirm every prejudice. His pilots flew as if the weight of an entire race rested on their shoulders, because it did. There is a photograph, taken in May 1945 at Ramitelli Airfield in Italy, that captures the essence of what the red tails represented. In it, Captain Brown stands beside his P-51C Mustang, its red tail gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, a swastika painted below the cockpit marking his kill of a German Me-262 jet fighter, the Luftwaffe's most advanced aircraft, shot down in a dogfight over Berlin on March 24. Brown's face is calm, almost serene, his flight suit unbuttoned at the collar, his hands resting on his hips. Behind him, his ground crew, also black, also segregated from white units, worked to rearm the aircraft. The image is mundane in its composition, yet profound in its defiance. Here was a man whom the enemy considered subhuman, standing victorious before a machine that represented the pinnacle of technological achievement, having bested an opponent who flew for a regime built on the mythology of his inferiority. The red tail became more than a tactical identifier. It became a symbol, not of American abundance in the way a crate of Coca-Cola or a Hershey bar did for ground troops, but of something deeper. It represented the promise that democracy, however imperfectly realized, held space for transformation. The German pilot who dismissed the idea of black aviators flew for a system that offered only hierarchy, only the rigid categorization of human worth. The Tuskegee Airmen flew for a nation that denied him equality yet could not deny him the sky. That contradiction, painful and undeniable, was nevertheless the crack through which change would eventually pour. By war's end, 66 Tuskegee Airmen had been killed in action. Another 32 became prisoners of war, enduring captivity in Stalag Luft III and other camps where they faced not only the hardships all POWs suffered but also the particular cruelty reserved for black men in a white supremacist state. Yet they endured. They returned. And when they came home to a country that still relegated them to the back of the bus, still denied them housing loans under the GI Bill, still insisted on their inferiority, they carried with them the irrefutable evidence of their competence. The empty seats in German cockpits, the bombers that returned, the medals struck in their honor. The sky over Berlin is quiet now. The ash has settled. The bombers and fighters have long since been melted down, repurposed, forgotten. But the lesson of that March morning in 1945 endures. Ideology is a brittle shield against truth. Prejudice is no armor against skill. The German officer who scoffed at the idea of black pilots learned this lesson at 22,000 feet, his aircraft trailing smoke, his certainties evaporating into the cold stratosphere. The Tuskegee Airmen did not merely defeat an enemy in battle. They dismantled a lie, one dogfight, one escort mission, one returned bomber at a time. And in doing so, they proved that the sky, at least, is indifferent to the hatreds of men. It demands only courage, precision, and the will to rise.